on earth is he doing that for, thinks I? He'll never drink his tea with a scorpion running free and easy about the room. Then he takes the tongs, and he settles his spectacles on his nose, and in a minute he lifted the creature up by the leg and dropped him into the boiling water." "And did that kill him?" said Mary. "Ah, sure enough. He boiled for longer time than grandfather liked, though, but I was so afeard of his coming round again. I ran to the public-house for some gin, and grandfather filled the bottle, and then we poured off the water and picked him out of the kettle and dropped him into the bottle, and he were there about 12 month." "What brought him to life at first?" asked Mary. "Why, you see, he were never really dead, only torpid. That is, dead, asleep with cold, and our good fire brought him round." "I'm glad father does not care for such things," said Mary. "Are you?" "Well, I'm often downright glad grandfather is so fond of his books and his creatures and his plants. It does my heart good to see him so happy, sorting them all at home, and so ready to go in search of more whenever he's a spare day. Look at him now, he's gone back to his books, and he'll be as happy as a king, working away till I make him go to bed. It keeps him silent, to be sure, but so long as I see him earnest and pleased and eager, what does that matter? Then, when he has his talking bouts, you can't think how much he has to say. Dear grandfather, you don't know how happy we are." Mary wondered if the dear grandfather heard all this, for Margaret did not speak in an undertone. But no, he was far too deep and eager in solving a problem. He did not even notice Mary's leaving, and she went home with a feeling that she had that night made the acquaintance of two of the strangest people she had ever saw in her life. Margaret, so quiet, so commonplace, until her singing powers were called forth, so silent from home, so cheerful and agreeable at home, and her grandfather so very different from any one Mary had ever seen. Margaret had said he was not a fortune-teller, but she did not know whether to believe her. To resolve her doubts, she told the story of the evening to her father, who was interested by her account, and curious to see and judge for himself. Opportunities are not often wanting where inclination goes before, and ere the end of the winter Mary looked upon Margaret almost as an old friend. The latter would bring her work when Mary was likely to be at home in the evenings, and sit with her. And Job Legh would put a book and his pipe in his pocket, and just step round the corner to fetch his grandchild, ready for a talk if he found Barton in, ready to pull out pipe and book if the girls wanted him to wait, and John was still at his club. In short, ready to do whatever would give pleasure to his darling Margaret. I do not know what points of resemblance or dissimilitude, for this joins people as often as that, attracted the two girls to each other. Margaret had the great charm of possessing good, strong common sense. And do you not perceive how involuntarily this is valued? It is so pleasant to have a friend who possesses the power of setting a difficult question in a clear light, whose judgment can tell what is best to be done, and who is so convinced of what is wisest, best, that in consideration of the end, all difficulties in the way diminished. People admire talent and talk about their admiration, but they value common sense without talking about it, and often without knowing it. So Mary and Margaret grew in love one toward the other, and Mary told many of her feelings in a way she had never done before to any one. Most of her foibles were made known to Margaret, but not all. There was one cherished weakness still concealed from every one. It concerned a lover, not beloved, but favoured by fancy, a gallant, handsome young man, but not beloved. Yet Mary hoped to meet him every day in her walks, blushed when she heard his name, and tried to think of him as her future husband, and above all tried to think of herself as his future wife. Alas, poor Mary, bitter woe did thy weakness work thee. She had other lovers. One or two would gladly have kept her company, but she held herself too high, they said. Jem Wilson said nothing, but loved on and on, ever more fondly. He hoped against hope. He would not give up, for it seemed like giving up life to give up thought of Mary. He did not dare to look at any end of all this. The present, so that he saw her, touch the hem of her garment, was enough. Surely, in time, such deep hope would beget love. He would not relinquish hope, and yet her coldness of manner was enough to daunt any man, and it made Jem more despairing than he would acknowledge for a long time even to himself. But one evening he came round by Barton's house, a willing messenger for his father, and opening the door saw Margaret sitting asleep before the fire. She had come in to speak to Mary, and worn out by a long working, watching night, she fell asleep in the genial warmth. An old-fashioned saying about a pair of gloves came into Jem's mind, and stepping gently up, he kissed Margaret with a friendly kiss. She awoke, and perfectly understanding the thing, she said, "For shame of yourself, Jem! What would Mary say?" Lightly said, lightly answered. She'd no but say, "Practice makes perfect." And they both laughed, but the words Margaret had said rankled in Jem's mind. Would Mary care? Would she care in the very least? They seemed to call for an answer by night and by day, and Jem felt that his heart told him Mary was quite indifferent to any action of his. Still he loved on, ever more fondly. Mary's father was well aware of the nature of Jem Wilson's feeling for his daughter, but he took no notice of them to any one, thinking Mary full young yet for the cares of married life, and unwilling, too, to entertain the idea of parting with her at any time, however distant. But he welcomed Jem at his house as he would have done his father's son, whatever were his motives for coming, and now and then admitted the thought that Mary might do worse, when her time came, than marry Jem Wilson, a steady workman at a good trade, a good son to his parents, and a fine manly-spirited chap, at least when Mary was not by, for when she was present he watched her too closely and too anxiously to have much of what John Barton called spunk in him. It was towards the end of February in that year, and a bitter black frost had lasted for many weeks. The keen east wind had long since swept the streets clean, though in a gusty day the dust would rise like pounded ice, and many people's faces quite smart with the cold force with which it blew against them. Houses, sky, people, and everything looked as if a gigantic brush had washed them all over with a dark shade of Indian ink. There was some reason for this grimy appearance on human beings, whatever there might be for the dun looks of the landscape, for soft water had become an article not even to be purchased, and the poor washerwoman might be seen vainly trying to procure a little by breaking the thick grey ice that coated the ditches and ponds in the neighbourhood. People prophesied a long continuance to this already lengthened frost, said the spring would be very late, no spring fashions required, no summer clothing purchased for a short uncertain summer. Indeed, there was no end to the evil prophesied during the continuance of that bleak east wind. Mary hurried home one evening just as daylight was fading from Mrs. Simmonds, with her shawl held up to her mouth and her head bent as if in deprecation of the meeting wind. So she did not perceive Margaret till she was close upon her at the very turning into the court. "Bless me, Margaret, is that you? Where are you bound to?" "To nowhere but your own house, that is, if you'll take me in. I've a job of work to finish to-night. Mourning, as must be in time for the funeral to-morrow. And grandfather has been out moss-hunting, and will not be home till late." "Oh, how charming it will be! I'll help you if you're backward. Have you much to do?" "Yes, I only got the order yesterday at noon, and there's 3 girls besides the mother, and what with trying on and matching the stuff, for there was not enough in the piece they chose first. I'm above a bit behindhand. I've the skirts all to make. I kept that work till candlelight, and the sleeves, to say nothing of little bits to the bodies, for the missus is very particular, and I could scarce keep from smiling while they were crying so, really taking on sadly, I'm sure, to hear first one and then t'other clear up to notice the set of her gown. They weren't to be